everyone, welcome back. We are in 6th grade. This is Unit 7, Lesson 12A, and this is us finding our body measure for different units of length. So we have some wonderful volunteers here to show us some lengths that we could remember to help us remember how big something is. And it's something on our bodies. Now the tricky thing is it's easier for me because I'm all done growing, so mine won't change. Yours are probably going to change. The things that are an inch or a foot or whatever may be, probably are going to be different for you as you grow. So you might have to find new ones. So if you've done this in past years, you might find that the measures don't work anymore and you have to find different ones. But here we are, and we're going to start with our American Standard System. So we're going to start with an inch. So hold on to your hats, and I hope that you can follow along and also do this. All right, so I have a couple of different ways to measure. I have the regular ruler, so if you have this is going to work for you. I also have this, so if you don't maybe have a sort of a school ruler, but you can find sort of a construction type of tape measure, maybe one of the people in your family has one that they can share with you, that would be wonderful. I also found this. I don't even know where we got this, but it's kind of a fun thing. It's again for construction of some kind, but it's kind of a cool thing. So you can use any of those and they will all work. So let's go and see what an inch looks like. Okay, so here's our inch measure. So show us with the ruler. Well, that's really hard to see, actually. There we go. All right, so it's the distance from one knuckle to the other knuckle on the pinky. Thank you. Here's another one. Okay, now this is another one. It's again a knuckles measure, but if you have different size fingers, different fingers are different sizes. So he's using his first finger, and that is an inch. Thanks. Okay, and here's the third one, and this is the distance from the knuckle to the end of the finger. So you can see that's an inch. Thanks. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is you maybe remember that 12 inches equals 1 foot. But we don't always want to measure out our little pinky finger from knuckle to knuckle or whatever it may be 12 times. That feels a little overwhelming sometimes. It's nice to have a 1 foot measure. So look for something on your body that is 1 foot. Let's see what we found. Okay, so this is actually the 1 foot. So that's kind of cool. You can see that kind of from the bottom of his shoe up to the top is about a foot. Now, you notice it's a little bit less. Your measurement does not have to be exact. It just needs to be a general tool to help you know how big is a foot. He just happens to have a 1 foot, which is pretty cool. Thanks. Okay, this is the 1 foot arm. So you can see kind of from his elbow up to his shoulder, that's 1 foot. So this is the 1 foot arm. Thanks. Okay, and here is the knee to hip. So 1 foot from your knee to your hip. There we go. Lots of different choices for the 1 foot. Great. So you may know now also that there are 36, if I can get that in the shot, there we go. There are 36 inches in 1 yard. There are also 3 feet in 1 yard. So now we're going to look for something on our body that is a yard. And again, it doesn't have to be exactly perfect. It just needs to somehow show generally what that would look like so that you have a general sense of how long that is or how big that is. So let's see what we found for 1 yard. Okay, so there's a yard from roughly the top of his head down to his knee. So that's kind of a cool measurement from the top of his head to his knee. And you can see he's actually a little taller than that, but it's totally no big deal. It just reminds him that that's about what a yard is. Okay, here's the yard measure. And you can see it goes from the floor right to his hip. So that's actually a super easy measure because he's going to be really accurate when he wants to know how far a yard is because there's no real guesswork there. It just goes right from his foot right to his hip. Now, this tricky thing is as he grows, he's going to have to find a new measure because as he gets taller and taller, he's going to find that that is no longer a yard. But it's a yard now. It works perfectly. That's a great measure to get him started with a yard.
Studio Polly.
There we go. There's another one. And another measure. So actually he's quite a bit taller. So it could be that measure lasts you for a while, as in maybe all the way through middle school and even into high school. That could be a measure that works really well for you. So there's another example. Okay, so those are the main units of measure that we use when we're using our American Standard System. And of course, that ends in then a mile. We obviously can't show you something that's a mile. So you'll have to practice that in your car. So next time you're driving around somewhere with your family, have them, if you're not sure how much a mile is, have them help you figure that out. And it's interesting to figure out how much a mile is in town because you're stopping, starting, turning corners, etc. And then also how much a mile is when you're out in the country. Sometimes that can be very easy to measure because it's where intersections occur. But don't get tricked. There are also intersections that aren't at a mile. So, but you have to measure that in the car. Okay, so the next system that we're learning is the metric system. And there was a huge push when I was a kid, when I was your age, there was a huge push for us to go into the metric system in the United States. And you know who didn't want that? It wasn't the kids, it wasn't the teachers. It was the families. They said, no way, man. We already know inches. We already know feet. We already know yards. We don't want to have to learn something new. But the rest of the world uses the metric system. So it really is important to learn it. And depending on what field you go into, you may use it all the time. Scientists and doctors use the metric system all the time, researchers all the time. So depending on what your interest is, you may really use the metric system all the time. If you go into the construction trades in the US, chances are you're going to use the American Standard System more. So here's the metric system. Metric system, mm, millimeters, cm, centimeters, dm, decimeters, and just m is meters. Whoops, I forgot to write that. M equals meters. Okay, so let's see what our millimeter measure. It's super, super tiny. Get ready. Here's our millimeter measure. Okay, so here's our first millimeter measure. You can see it's about the thickness of his fingernails. So that is a craziness. So depending on how thick your fingernails are, and some people have thicker or thinner fingernails, but it's about the width, not side to side, but rather just the straight thickness of his fingernail. Very, very tiny. All right, there you can see another example. That's another fingernail width measurement. So that fingernail, his fingernail is a little bit thinner, just in terms of thickness. It's a little bit thinner, so it's not quite a millimeter, but it still works to help him remember that millimeters are super, super tiny. Unfortunately, hold on, he's actually showing us in inches, so hold on. Okay, so that happens to a lot of kids, so don't let that prevent you from just fixing it up. The two sides of the ruler, that's really important, the two sides of the ruler, one of them has the metric system and one of them has American Standard. So you can see he's flipped it over now, and now his finger is showing a teeny, teeny, tiny little part of a centimeter, one part out of 10, that's a millimeter. Great job. Okay, this one's a little hard to see, but it's actually a perfect measurement. So if you've been in my classes before, you probably heard me talk about this measure. It is the thickness of a t-shirt, of the hem of your t-shirt. So it's really, really hard to see, especially maybe since this is a gray t-shirt, it's hard to see on here. But we are measuring how wide the bottom of his t-shirt is. So take that out a second. So this is the part we're measuring. Like we took the hem and we're looking that way. That's right there, almost exactly a millimeter. So it's a really, really easy measurement to carry because it doesn't change year after year because you wear t-shirts year after year and all t-shirts are about that thick. Now, don't get confused with like a sweatshirt or a fleece or something. They're going to be much thicker than a millimeter, but any t-shirt will work. All right, so there are 10 millimeters, the thickness of your t-shirt. It's teeny, teeny, tiny. There's 10 millimeters in 1 centimeter. So we have some centimeter measurements for you. And I will show you mine first. Mine is my finger. I have kind of tiny fingernails in terms of just width. So my fingernails are almost exactly, you can see it right there, almost exactly 1 millimeter wide. Now, different people have different widths of fingers and fingernails, and so I just happen to have tiny fingernails. But so some people might, if the wider ones, they might use their pinky or something. But my first finger, the width of my nail is almost exactly 1 centimeter. So that works really well for me. What's yours? Let's see other people's. Okay, so his centimeter measure is also one of his fingernails, but it's actually a different way of measuring the fingernail. It's from kind of the base of the fingernail to the tip. Now, don't get confused on this one. If you have long fingernails or short ones, and you're measuring the whole length of the fingernail, the long fingernail, that's going to change every time you trim your nails. So he's actually just measuring from the very tip, kind of where it connects to most of his skin, down to kind of where it starts popping out as what you would trim, kind of the part that starts being dead rather than alive. So that's his measure. So that won't change for him. Even if his fingernails grow longer, that measure is still going to be the same. So that's good measure for him. Okay, so this is kind of a cool thing. We were just talking about how different, depending on how old you are, different body parts are different. Like you grow taller, your arms and legs grow longer. But isn't this interesting? We're very much different ages, but the width of our fingers, our first fingernail, is almost exactly the same. So his body measurement is the width of his first finger is 1 centimeter, and so is mine. So that's kind of cool that regardless of the fact that there's 37 years different in our ages, we still have the same size width wise of fingernails. That's cool. Okay, here's a different one. He's measuring his pinky, but it's not his fingernail, it's the front to back width of his pinky. So that's kind of a different measure, but it's also super easy to remember and super easy to measure something. So for him to just tell us quickly how big a centimeter is, he's just going to hold up his pinky and then we'll know. So that's another great measure. All right. So we're talking about moving on to a decimeter. That's a tricky one, and you don't always hear it much about it. In fact, our friend said, I didn't even remember what a decimeter was. It's a hard one and not one that we necessarily use all the time. But a decimeter is 10 centimeters. The prefix deci means 10. So it's 10 centimeters. So my decimeter is the whole width of my hand. So you can see, since I'm not doing a very good job of showing you this, there we go. But if I put my thumb in from the side of one side of my hand to the other is 10 centimeters. And now, aside from that, it's a decimeter. That actually works really well for me when I'm trying to remember something, if it's bigger than a centimeter, because I don't have to measure one fingernail at a time. 1, 2, 3. That would be crazy. Instead, I know that the width of my hand, including my thumb, is 10 centimeters. So if something is 37 centimeters, super easy for me to figure out because it's about 3.5 hands wide for me. That's how we use these body measurements to help us. So what on your body is 10 centimeters or 1 decimeter? Okay, his decimeter measure is from where his hand bends to the tip of his fingers. Now, that's a tricky one, and that'll definitely change as his hands get bigger as he gets older. So that's one that he's going to kind of keep in mind might change. But for right now, it's working well. And what that means he can do is he can just hold his hand up and sort of measure it going along how many of those are 10 centimeters, how many of those he needs depending on how many centimeters it is. So that's a good decimeter measure for right now. Okay, his decimeter is from the end of his longest finger down to his knuckle. And we were just talking about whether that's actually going to change. I don't know how much your hands grow. Once you get into high school, I don't know how much they grow, like for the rest of your life, or if your hands are fully grown. So that could be a measure that just stays with him his entire life. So when he needs to measure something that's more than 10 centimeters, that would be a super easy measurement to kind of just bend his hand and measure from his longest finger to the knuckle, and whatever the centimeters might be, that could be really easy. So, oh yeah, and there the Pringles Candace photobombing. All right. Okay, the last one that we're going to learn about for the metric system is the meter. A meter is very close to a yard. So we don't have different measures for a meter and a yard. That would be too hard to think about. Instead, we're going to talk about a meter stick and a yardstick. And a meter is 100 centimeters or 10 decimeters. In the metric system, what makes it easy is everything is 10 more than the last thing. So 10 millimeters is 1 centimeter. 10 centimeters is 1 decimeter. 10 decimeters is 1 meter. And it's kind of set up that way. It makes it really easy. So let's take a look at our yardstick. Now, this is our yardstick. We can tell it's a yardstick because these are inches and it ends at 36. So this is a yardstick, not a meter stick. When we flip it over, we can see also that it's also just a yardstick. It ends at 36, but look at how many centimeters it ends at. a little bit more than 91. If it went to 100, that would be a meter stick. So we could do, here we go. So the difference between a meter stick and a yardstick is about 3 inches. It's about the difference between ending at the 36 and then going all the way and ending at the 39 inches. So that's just the difference between, about right there is the difference. Whoops, and that's how long that is, in a meter stick versus a yardstick. So that's why we don't have a different body measure, because it's so close that it really doesn't make much difference. My body measure for my yardstick is from my, let's see, whoa, how can you see this? There we go. From the tip of my fingers to my shoulder right here. Now you can see my shoulder is actually a little bit wider, so it's a little bit better of a measure for a meter. It doesn't matter. Meter, yard, it's still roughly the same thing. And it helps me remember how long that is. So when I think of how far that is, I just think like, well, it's from, if I need a quick measure, it's from the tip of my finger on one hand to my other side shoulder. So your lesson today is to do the same thing that we've done here, to write down all of these. In fact, this was my little cheat sheet for my helpers to remember what they needed. So you do this too. On your body, find an inch, a foot, and a yard measure. On your body, find a millimeter, or you can use your shirt. That's what I use for that. A millimeter, centimeter, decimeter, and meter. And your meter and your yard, just like ours, can be the same. So good luck with that. Write some comments for me about where yours are, or take pictures if you want, and we'll see you next time. Bye.